I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off-road. The guy managed the group. He was like, what are you doing in this beautiful car? I'm like, I'm going off-road. He's like, are you sure? Because you can use one of ours. And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability, as well as its robust interior, are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
Sometimes it takes a different approach to help you unlock your true potential. Capella University's game-changing FlexPath format helps you learn at your own pace and fit earning a degree into your life. From before you enroll to after you graduate, you'll be supported by people who are invested in your success so you can pursue your goals knowing that help is available if you need it. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show on the Choose Yourself Network. Today on the James Altucher Show.
It seems like it's not always coming up with the new absurdist idea, but kind of combining old concepts together in a new way.
Yeah, that was a big breakthrough for me because when you start, you just want to be original all the time. And if something's been done, you don't want to do it. I think if you're creative, that's your instinct. But there aren't a zillion original stories. So what you have to do is take an old story and make it original. Put your own spin on it. It's a perspective on life. I think you're just always looking for the twist.
And why do you think you have a twisted perspective on life?
It's exactly the way I've seen the world, which is it's so much more fun to be looking for that thing that makes you laugh.
Okay, well, I am really honored to have a living piece of television history in the room. I hope you don't mind me saying that.
No, that's okay.
Nell Scovell.
Could you call me iconic?
You're iconic. You are iconic. You're an icon.
I've always wanted to be called iconic.
Well, now you're officially iconic. Nell Scovell, you just came out with a book, Just the Funny Parts. But I'm glad you came out with this book because it gives me an excuse to have you on. I probably wouldn't have known your name, honestly, without the book. But I know everything you've worked on. You've worked on everything from classics like The Garry Shandling Show, then Murphy Brown, Monk. I'm reading this off the cover here. The Muppets, Charmed. After Newhart, you worked on Late Night with David Letterman, and that became part of a controversial article you wrote much later. You were a creator and showrunner of Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
Which I know you watched religiously.
Well, I have daughters 19 and 16, so yes, I did.
Oh, wow.
I wouldn't say religiously, but they did.
Yes.
And I watched it with them. And I thought that was just a great idea to come up with a show about that because Sabrina was a favorite cartoon character of my from when I was a kid. That I did read religiously when I was a young boy. You know, it was like Sabrina the Teenage Witch, kind of part of the whole genre of, Archie and Josie and the Pussycats.
Yeah.
And my oldest daughter, Josie, is named after Josie from Josie and the Pussycats. So I love that whole kind of sugar pop comic books,
Yep.
which you then, turned into a television show, which is just a genius idea.
What was absurdist, and we got to run all the tired TGIF plots through this new magical blender. So yes, we did an episode like Sabrina Needs a Prom Date, but our solution was her aunts make her a date out of Mando on the kitchen table, who they magically bring to life. So that was the fun part of that show.
Well, isn't that's interesting in and of itself that you took these kind of old tropes. Like I could picture Beverly Hills 90210 and Shannon Doherty Needs a Prom Date. Boom. That's like a classic storyline.
By the way, the date was played by Brian Austin Green, who
so
came
funny.
from 90210. So you're exactly right.
Was that inside humor to cast him in that part?
Oh, well, a little bit. I think so. But we also, had these amazing guys like Dana Gould and Chris Elliott and, all of my friends, Joel Hodgson, these kind of edgy comics from that time come on our show.
Well, Chris Elliott, did you know him from the Letterman show?
I was after his time, but I always wanted to work with him.
He's a genius.
And his books are really funny, too.
I haven't read his books.
So he was in an episode I wrote called Mars Attracts, and he plays a special agent who Aunt Hilda bumps into on Mars because they're vacationing. The skiing on Mars is excellent. But again, that was you take the tired episode of the family ski vacation, but you put it on Mars and you throw in Chris Elliott and, talking animals, and you have a Sabrina episode.
So that's interesting. So I want to kind of talk about the arc of your career in a second, because to some extent, you've lived like the dream career. You've worked on like every fun show. You're a comedy writer, so it's I imagine there's lots of laughter in the process. You've even written jokes for Barack Obama, which is incredible to hear your words.
Yes.
I heard a guy say this in another interview, so I hate repeating it, but you heard your words coming through the president's mouth, which must be amazing. But you've had this dream career, which I want to talk about in a second. But let's just talk about process for a second, because you brought it up with Sabrina. It seems like it's not always coming up with the new absurdist idea, but kind of combining old concepts together in a new way.
Yeah, that was a big breakthrough for me, because when you start, you just want to be original all the time. And if something's been done, you don't want to do it. I think if you're creative, that's your instinct. I mean, there are plenty of people in television who come at it very differently. They come in and say, oh, you know what we could do? Remember at the end of Star Wars when this thing happens, we could do that here. And those are not the people I enjoy working with, because I always feel like, well, if it's been done, that's a reason not to do it. But at the same time, I've kind of learned that there aren't a zillion original stories. So what you have to do is take an old story and make it original. Put your own spin on it.
So if you were to write, like, even though the show doesn't exist anymore right now, if you were to write an episode of Sabrina right now, what would be kind of your initial thinking process, given that most, if not all, of the episodes that occurred in its, what was it, 6-year run, 7-year run?
Yeah. So, nobody's asked me that. And the first thought that popped into my head is, I argue with my own sons about checking their phones so much. So what if there's a spell that every time she checks her phone, she gets a shock? And then so you play on whatever is new today and do that twist.
So, okay, so she would have to, so somebody would cast that spell.
Right. Her aunts think she's using the cell phone too much. And what it does is she gets a shock and she can't remember what she was talking about, because they're angry with her that she's not paying attention to them.
And maybe there's a cute guy in school who's trying to call her or text with her. They don't call anymore, they just text. So she has to figure out other ways to communicate, and that could lead to humorous situations.
Right, or just the complication of whatever happens to her when she looks at the phone is getting in the way of something else she wants to do. So now you have that metaphor of by paying so much attention to this technology, you're missing out on the real world.
So when I said my thing, you thought of that. What was wrong with something was wrong with my idea. I sensed it on your face there. Something was wrong with the cute guy liking her, and she needed to find some workaround to communicate with him. What was wrong with that?
I think because it was a cute boy and the assumption that that would be the target desire of a young girl.
So yours is kind of this broader statement that technology is getting in the way of how our teenagers are developing today.
Right.
And so you're taking kind of this funny little way of presenting it and making a broader message.
Yes, ideally. And it's, you don't want it to always be about dating or boys, although sometimes it is, because I brought up the prom date. But ideally, yeah, it might be, Sabrina was an interesting character, if I do say so myself, because her, the issue wasn't like, I want to be popular and I'm not. It was, I want to be normal and I'm not. So it's always about that.
So it reminds me to some extent of, in a slightly different way of older shows like Bewitched or I Dream of Genie, which
I grew up on and loved.
Right, and I grew up on them as well. But oddly, it was the husbands that wanted their wives to be normal. Their wives were the witches or the genies or girlfriends, whatever. And the husbands wanted them to be normal. And here, Sabrina wants to be normal.
Well, the last line of the pilot was she's had this terrible day and she begs the witches' council to get a do-over, which she is granted, and she gets to do the day over and not, turn the cheerleader into a pineapple. And she rushes home at the end and says, "Yay, I'm normal. Gotta go tell the cat." And she goes off to tell her cat, the talking cat, Salem. And that, to me, in a nutshell, was that show.
That's funny. So, and again, we're gonna get to the book and
what book?
The arc of your career and all the different ups and downs. But this one concept that we're talking about is really fascinating to me. So, to some extent, even the prom date episode that you brought up, and then the episode we just kind of made up, whether it's good or bad, is not necessarily about the events. So the events being she's a teenage witch, she gets a spell that she gets shocked with the phones, or in the episode that actually happened, her aunt makes a date out of Mando. But the show is about her relationship between her and her aunts, and I feel like every show you say, what's the show about? Julia Louis-Dreyfus becomes the president. But that's not really what these great shows are about. It's about the relationships of the main characters and the people around them. And I feel that I feel that's the difference between a good show and a bad show to a large extent.
Yes, and there's I know there are theories that every show, even workplace comedies, break down into family where there's the mom and the dad and the kids, and I think character comedy is my favorite thing to write. And look at one of the ways I approached President Obama was I think he's a sitcom character. He was the most powerful man in the world, and he lived with his mother-in-law. Like, if that's not a setup for comedy, I don't know.
I didn't know that. He lived with his mother-in-law?
Yes.
In the White House?
Yeah, Michelle's mom lived in the White House.
I didn't know that. I love the actual classic joke that you wrote for the correspondence dinner, which shows this kind of self-awareness and vulnerability on his part, where he basically says, at the end, he was born in Hawaii, and then he gives this big wink to the audience. And its timing, of course, has to be perfect, or else you would miss the wink. But it kind of plays into the whole, birther movement and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So vulnerability obviously is a large part of comedy as well.
Yes.
And maybe we can get later into the process of...
Not always. I mean, sometimes blustery is funny too. Like, I worked on Coach for over 2 seasons with Craig T. Nelson, and that character refused to ever admit he was wrong. So...
Or you worked on The Simpsons, Homer Simpson
always stupid. But that's one of the reasons I had trouble writing my memoir, or one of the most difficult parts is when you write a TV character, consistency is important. But in our real lives, we tend to be all over the place. And sometimes we're very brave, and sometimes, we back away. Yeah, and sometimes we go out of our way to be kind, and sometimes, we don't always have that ability to do that. And so it was really hard. Like, I worried that the Nell character wasn't likable enough. What did you think?
The Nell character?
Yeah.
In
my book.
You.
Yes.
No, you're totally likable.
Oh, excellent.
No, and I'm fat, and I bookmarked all over the place, and that's why I lent the book out to 3 friends of mine who are interested in the television business.
But you know what I mean by consistency of character? That's the staple of a sitcom.
Particularly like The Simpsons, which runs for 29 seasons, where Homer Simpson has to be the exact same character every season. Like, they never grow. So, or Seinfeld, where the characters are never supposed to learn. So there's many shows where the actual trope is that they're never going to change.
Right.
So yeah, I think I'm trying to think of shows where the characters do change. Are there any shows that you've written on where the characters do change over time?
Oh, what a good question. I mean, you see little bits of growth, and, Coach, he does end up getting married and evolves a little, but, it's always 2 steps forward to the 1 step back to get back to the comedy.
Because even let's take a comedy like Curb Your Enthusiasm, which you contributed to a story idea that got made. Larry David, the character, the events in his life changes, but he himself doesn't really change, across the 9 seasons.
Right. I remember once reading that he said the worst part of being rich is that you can't complain anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet he wants to. That's his consistent character.
Yeah.
So, but he managed to do it in Curb Your Enthusiasm, which I think a lot of people would watch Curb Your Enthusiasm and not quite get it at first, saying, oh, it's just a bunch of rich, Hollywood actors complaining about things. But that's kind of part of the fun of it.
Well, I came up with that idea. It became the Ida Funkhauser Roadside Memorial, where Larry steals flowers from a roadside memorial. And it truly happened that I was driving to a brunch and was beating myself up because I hadn't brought a hostess gift. And I noticed there was this roadside memorial by my car. I was stopped at a red light. And I actually had a moment of, if I just grabbed those flowers, could I bring those as the hostess gift? And I remember laughing at what an awful thought that was, and then thinking, oh, that would be perfect for Larry David.
Do you find a lot of script ideas or things you write about come from sort of weird observations or thoughts in real life?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. Is it more likely to come from something weird, something annoying, or something that makes you angry?
Well, I would say it comes from some real impulse that, look, we know the difference between thoughts and actions, right? You can think anything, you just can't do everything. And so the comedy comes from thinking something outrageous that you might do and then going, well, I can't do that because it's not socially acceptable, but it's funny.
So do you think of things every day of something? Is it do you have after, I don't know, let's call it 30 years of writing comedy, are you just constantly thinking of outrageous things that you can't do?
Well, in the book, I talk about how when someone says, where do you get your ideas from? I compare it to the question, how do you grow your hair? It's just something you do, right? And then things come out of your head.
Yeah, but sometimes, so let's say I have a podcast with someone who is the best in the world at something, I've interviewed Garry Kasparov, who was the world chess champion, or Tony Hawk, who was the world skateboarding champion. These people were the best in the world from the age of 9 on. and they can't sometimes articulate why they're the best at something because they were just so much more talented than everyone else from a very young age, and they've been doing it for so long, they can no longer verbally articulate why it is they can do what they do or think the way they think. Do you think, but I feel like with writing or comedy, if you're sitting down to write comedy, there must be some kind of, what happened to me today, or, something that you start with that kind of gets the juices flowing.
It's a perspective on life. I think you're just always looking for the twist.
And why do you think you have a twisted perspective on life?
Well,
how can we cultivate it?
No,
'Cause I think it's healthy to be a little twisted.
Do you know that play, 1,000 Clowns
No.
by Herb Gardner? Oh, it's a great old movie. And there's a line in it, which is, if things aren't funny, then they're just what they are. And then life becomes a long dental appointment. And it's just exactly the way I've seen the world, which is it's so much more fun to be looking for that thing that makes you laugh.
So let's start at the beginning. You wanted to, you knew you were funny. You loved writing. You wanted to break into TV. You describe this all in the book, by the way. But what's the first step? You're trying to break into Hollywood, where, as you point out in the book, there's less women than men. What's the first step?
Well, I was writing for magazines in New York. I had a very
Spy and
Vanity Fair
yeah.
and Rolling Stone and Vogue. I had a really nice career as a magazine writer. And then one day I bump into a friend who was an editor, and she says to me, Nell, I don't mean this as an insult, but I think you could write for television.
Why did she think it might be an insult? Because I remember thinking that when I read that in the book.
Well, it was the 80s, and I don't think TV was as respected as it is now. And also it was an East Coast, West Coast thing.
And you were writing for Spy, which is like a particularly hip New York magazine.
That's right. Yeah, and I think it's, now there's, Harvard's got a, direct line from the Lampoon to Hollywood. But it was at the very start of that exodus. So I think it made it sound like you're not, an intellectual, or it would be beneath you to make a lot of money.
So why did she think you in particular would be good for TV? What insight?
Oh, interesting. I think it's because I wrote pieces that usually had a visual component to them. So I was very aware, too, of...
Like, what's an example of that?
Well, in this piece I did for Spy called Too Rich and Too Thin, it had these great graphics where we had photos of women with insets of their, super, their shoulders jutting out or really thin arms. And just, it was a way to demonstrate the point I was making.
Even that title almost sounds like a Joan Didion type of title also. Like, I could picture her writing something similar in California in the 60s.
Yeah.
So okay, so then what happened? What did you do?
So I had one friend who was writing for TV. Not a close friend, and I called him and said, "What do you do?" And he told me, "You write a spec script for a show." And the most popular show at the time was The Cosby Show. And it would have been very smart to write a spec script for that. But instead, I picked this cult favorite that I liked, which was called It's Garry Shandling Show.
Iconic show. Second time we'll use iconic here.
Was it, though? I mean, I feel like those who know it and love it really love it, but it struggled.
I think it became more iconic, of course, after the Larry Sanders Show. But it did highlight Garry Shandling's unique brand of humor.
Yeah, it was so smart. And so I write this spec script, and through my articles from Spy, I got an agent who was this very young guy who I think had been made an agent the week before. And he sends my script to the Shandling people, and they bought it. And then they didn't make it. So, but part of the story of my life is getting just enough positive reinforcement to keep going.
Well, okay, so, but I think that is a choice. So sometimes when people are, when someone's rejected, okay, it's like something happens in the brain. You get this this spike of cortisol that you're being pushed out of the tribe. You're not good enough for this tribe. So you have two choices. You can either give up, which reduces the cortisol, because like, oh, okay, I'm not good enough for this. I'll do something else. And so that reduces the stress. Or you persist, and like you say, you find the positive lifeline in this, which you did. So it seems like you consistently did that, which is find the positive, and you had just enough reinforcement, like, oh, right for this, it got accepted, but then got rejected. What did you do next?
Then I got hired on Newhart, the final season of the Barry Kemp created Vermont show.
He's like running a hotel, running an inn or something.
He's running an inn, and he's got George the handyman, who's played by Tom Poston. His wife was played by Mary Fran. And these crazy woodsmen, Larry, Daryl, and Daryl, walk in. And I notice you have on your wall the album cover from The Button-Down Mind of Bob Newhart. And he used to do the warm-up of every show, and he'd come out and do the telephone routines like Sir Walter Raleigh, or, they were so great.
So he was famous for that he had the best-selling comedy albums in the early 60s with his telephone routines. Like, he'd be one half of a telephone conversation. So you're saying, I didn't know that he would do that as the warm-up of his show in the 80s?
Yes.
That's incredible. So
it was great.
He would keep up his comedic. A lot of these guys who we know from the Bob Newhart show or Newhart, people like him, you don't realize that at the core, they love stand-up the best.
They do. I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I love writing jokes. Like, after, I just wrote a whole book. I'd rather just write jokes. And the impact you get, that laughter, it's immediate. And there's nothing like that.
And I know I've heard you say in an interview you don't like stand-up because there's writing jokes and then there's...
No. I don't like performing stand-up.
Right, you don't like performing stand-up.
No, I love stand-up.
Yeah, you don't like performing it. But there is something visceral about writing a joke and then using your body to communicate that joke in such a way that all the bodies around you are laughing.
Oh, I totally get it. And if it didn't terrify me, I would love to try to do it. I tell the story.
We've got to get you to try to do it. We're sitting right on top of a comedy club.
Very early in my very first job, I bond with the guys in the office next to me who happen to be Greg Daniels and Conan O'Brien. And we go to a comedy club together. We're just babies in our early 20s. And we bump into Jay Leno, who's just hanging out there, and he makes small talk with us. And I guess I said some smart-ass comment to him, and he looked at me and he said, "You're funny. You should do stand-up." And I was like, "Me?" And he said, "Yeah, don't," and he gestured to the showroom and said, "Don't you think you could do better than those people?" And I said, "No, I think the worst of those people are very brave." And he said, "Nah, you shouldn't do stand-up."
But they learn bravery only by getting up on that stage over and over again. To learn that you could only learn by getting up on the stage. They're all
but you got to do it
time.
that first time, and I think that would have just destroyed me.
Yeah, so that's the one rejection. You had confidence enough in your writing that okay, I'm going to keep on persisting, but some fears will get to you.
Well, there's a self-consciousness. I can hide behind my words. I can hide behind the characters. I can hide behind the performers. It's like Albert Brooks in Broadcast News when he says, I say it here, it comes out there.
So I wanna actually get into the process of writing a joke. And I know you say it kind of just, it's like your hair growing. But okay, so you start writing on Newhart. You get this opportunity to work on, the late night with Dave Letterman.
Yeah.
And I think that does sound like it fits more what you were just saying. Like, you get to write pure jokes.
Right.
And maybe that was the attraction to it. And so what happened? Like, it sounds like in the book, like it was a pretty easy decision, even though it was complicated in other ways. It sounds like in your head, deep down, you knew that's what you wanted to do, go from Newhart to Letterman.
So many of the people I admired had spent time as writers at Letterman, from Merrill Markoe to Chris Elliott to Steve O'Donnell to George Meyer. It was the show to work on in the 80s and 90s. Dave was the funniest guy on TV.
Well,
right? Did you watch the show?
Yeah. Every night. So, and Dave was a great stand-up, long before he was doing that. And many of the people who have written on the show were they were funny guys, writers or stand-ups. But so you had a chance to basically write jokes that would be performed correctly, maybe. Or by a guy as great as Dave. People don't realize Dave Letterman. I mean, they do realize it, but he had his training as a stand-up comic. Really, like he developed. He didn't develop as an interviewer or as a weatherman. He developed his skill set as a stand-up. So, but he needed material every night, which is hard to do. Hence a writing.
Have you ever seen? I'm just thinking. I don't think I've ever seen footage of him doing stand-up in the early days.
I haven't seen that, but I read about it because he, in that book, I think I'm Dying Up Here, which eventually was, sort of redone as a Showtime special. I think he's prominent in that book because he broke the strike line to perform at the Comedy Store. So I think he and Jay Leno basically grew up together in this, and Robin Williams grew up together in the stand-up scene.
Yeah.
So, but I never have seen. I don't think there is footage of these things. So. But okay, so what was it like then starting day one, writing and pitching jokes for David Letterman?
Well, going back, maybe this is the theme. He has a very consistent voice. And, I found it very easy to capture that cranky guy who doesn't want to be there. But there actually wasn't that much writing on the show, which frustrated me because, I've come from writing full episodes on Newhart. I'd written a Simpsons episode. So now the idea of just getting in a joke or two every night is not as exciting.
But how many for his monologue, how many monologue jokes a night were pitched to him? Like among the whole writing room?
But he probably got pitched 50 to 100 jokes a night and would do 3. So those odds are not very good.
His monologue was only 3?
I think so. I think typically he would tell like 3 jokes.
And then the top 10 list?
Top 10 list. And then he would do one desk piece. So on Fridays, he would do viewer mail. And that was my favorite thing to contribute to. I love the viewer mail segments. Remember those?
Yeah. And what would you do? Just you would find the mail and then he would.
We would get these packets. I think I can't try to remember. You would maybe get your packets on Wednesday late afternoon, and then Thursday afternoon you had to turn in all your pitches, and I think you would turn in a dozen pitches, and then Friday you find out. I usually got like one in almost every week.
You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Garry Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get two memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply.
AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry, and literally billions of dollars are being invested. So buckle up. The problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power, so how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/advance. That's oracle.com/advance. oracle.com/advance.
What about with guests? If you knew a guest was coming, would you prepare jokes for him about the guest, or he would just riff? Was that just riffing mostly?
No, those segments are produced, and they each have producers, and there are pre-interviews, and very little of TV is spontaneous.
So that's what I'm saying. Would you ever be asked, "Hey, we have this guy coming on. Can you come up with some jokes that Dave can potentially have in his back pocket for this guy?"
No, we did have a runner with Mr. Peanut stopping by. Is he considered a celebrity? No, the one thing I remember about the celebrities is, going down and watching Elvis Costello rehearse, or Randy Travis, the country singer who I love, was on the show and I was there, and that was such a bonus. And there are times I talk in the book about how working on TV shows are both fun and not fun at the same time. But it is things I look back and getting to watch Bob Newhart do warm up, or getting to watch Harry Belafonte sing a song on the Smothers Brothers hour, and it's just like those. That's the compensation beyond the money.
So when you're on Letterman, though, or when you were writing on Letterman, I imagine you developed more kind of just this boom, boom, boom style of joke writing. Were you able to bring that back into sitcom writing?
Yeah. But that's sitcom writing. Is the character. You have to find the joke more than force it.
Like, let's give you an example.
Oh.
I'm sorry, I'm asking these totally naive questions.
Okay, no, I'll give you an example. I wrote a line for Murphy Brown when I was on it where everyone's disagreeing with Murphy, and she says, "I stand alone, all great minds do." And it's not a particularly funny line when I say it. In the moment, it killed. And it was just so perfectly a Murphy Brown idea that everyone disagrees with her, and she turns that around to being, "I'm a great mind."
And why you decide, I mean, you write about this extensively all over the place and talked about it, but ultimately, why did you make the move back from Letterman back to sitcom writing?
I really felt like I wasn't going to thrive at Letterman, mostly because I wasn't part of the inner clique. It was a very, I compare it to the court of King Louis, and Dave was the Sun King, and people served at his pleasure. And there were people who were court insiders. There were, a lot of whisper campaigns and backstabbing. And I really don't like office politics. And I didn't want to play the game. And I had other opportunities too. So in that way, I was privileged. I knew if I left the show, I was going to get another job. And
how did you know that so
well, I didn't
confidently?
know it, but I one of the things that actually gave me so much peace of mind was I had this career as a journalist, and I always kept it up. Even when I'm, running shows, I'm always like pitching articles on the side. And I think that was my safety net. And I always thought if TV goes away, I can always go back to magazines. And it really, it was such a psychological support.
Well, at some point then I feel like you went back into TV writing, but then at some point fairly early, you decided, my guess is you decided you needed to control the process yourself instead of just working for the process. So this way you could be the Sun King. And so you created and developed Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Maybe, can you tell how that kind of came about?
Well, it came to me, and I'm really grateful it did. And it wasn't my concept. Someone else put together the show, but it really, I think, was a good mating of that concept with someone who understood what would make it funny, but also what would make it real. And so I worked really hard to find, because I thought the more real I can make Sabrina's life seem, the funnier it is when we mess with it.
Why is that? Tell me the funny in that. Because I think this is an important part of the process.
Okay, so I'll give you an example. We did a very early episode that involved truth sprinkles. Now, TGIF was famous for, like, you have to learn a lesson, right? We're writing for a mainly kid audience, although it turned out a lot of adults watch Sabrina. So Sabrina wants to know if Harvey likes her. She's new to the school. She can't tell. He's giving her mixed signals. And she decides they're in cooking class together. They're making bundt cakes. And she'll sprinkle some truth sprinkles on his bundt cake and then ask him if he's interested in her. So the twist becomes, of course, she does the truth sprinkles for Harvey. The home ec teacher picks up the sprinkles and puts it on all the bundt cakes, which she then delivers to the teacher's lounge. And now everyone at school is telling each other the truth. And the lesson in the end was sort of subversive. And basically, the world would be a horrible place if everyone told the truth all the time.
By the way, there was a Gilligan's Island episode like this
Was
as well.
there?
Yes.
I didn't know that. What was it?
I don't remember exactly, but they all had gained the power that they had to tell the truth all the time, and it was a disaster.
Right.
So again, it's this idea that you could take the old and put it in this totally weird context with a teenage witch, and it's still funny.
Yeah, so that was like a bigger theme. I love doing themes about honesty or loyalty and
kind of taking it to an absurdist level.
Yeah.
Because I guess with a witch, and then you could take it to any level you want. So that brings out the funny in it somehow.
And we had Paul Feig was our science teacher, whose name was Mr. Poole. And so his first name was Gene. So Gene Poole was the science teacher. He was great. That was really fun to work with him.
I love him. Have you ever read his books? Forgot the names.
I read the first one.
Yeah, Super Stud or something like that, where he's like a kid who just can't meet girls. And then, of course, Freaks and Geeks was a great show that she wrote.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And then, I mean, it seems like then I imagine being a showrunner on Sabrina we talked about it a little earlier, but probably did that consume your entire life?
Yes. Yeah. And it's a tough job. I quote Mitch Hurwitz from Arrested Development in the book, saying running a show is like piloting a plane while the passengers throw rocks at your head. And you're like, if I go down, we all go down. And it's one of my frustrations with Hollywood is that these shows aren't run as more mission-based, where, everyone wants to do the best show possible and we're all going to pull together to do that. And, unfortunately, most of these shows are more ego-based, where, people are trying to force their ideas or get the credit or, it's... I've worked on shows, not Sabrina, but, I'll say more recently, The Muppets on ABC, and I still maintain that show should have worked. Bill Prady had this great idea to do it like The Office, where you're backstage of Miss Piggy has a late night talk show. And one of the things that it was a very hard show to produce. But on top of that, I think there were like 5 different concepts about what the tone and the angle of the show should be. And those, there was one on the stage, there was one from the executive producer, there was one from the network, there was one from the Muppets. And they all actually were all valid. But what never happened was getting all those people into a room together and saying, let's figure this out so we're all pulling in the right direction.
So Jim Henson, who originally created, obviously, the Muppets.
Just a genius.
I feel like if he had still been alive, it seems like every culture, whether it's a show or a business or a family, whatever, comes from the top down. And Jim Henson had this certainly playful attitude where the culture coming from the top down is going to create this very playful,
but he was
culture.
he was really inclusive. He really loved other people bringing in ideas. It's why all these creative people liked working with him.
Yeah.
So he wasn't dictatorial.
Well, when you were running Sabrina, how did you change the culture from given what you had seen on working on other TV shows?
Oh, well, we had an overwhelmingly female writer's room, and an overwhelmingly female cast. So that was vastly different from the shows I'd worked on.
And how did that, just culturally, if you were to compare a mostly female writer's room with a mostly male writer's room, what were the main differences other than kind of the obvious ones?
No, you're just the experiences. There's no difference other than you bring a different set of experiences because of that. And so I recently rewatched this episode I wrote for Sabrina, the one with Chris Elliott, and in it, Sabrina goes on a date with a cute ski instructor on Mars, and they're on a picnic. The Mars probe flies by, and they look at it and wave. And he leans over to kiss her at one point, and she pulls back, and he says, "I sense you're uncomfortable. Do you want to go back to the lodge?" And I realized that was me modeling consent for all these young women. Back in '96, when not a lot of people were talking about consent. And that comes from my own experience. And I'm not sure a male writer would have made sure that if she pulled back, the guy should acknowledge it.
So consent obviously now is all wrapped into this Me Too movement and kind of becomes this big discussion around Harvey Weinstein and all the Hollywood executives that used power to basically ignore consent. And what kind of was sort of uncovered in this is that everybody kind of knew what was happening for 20, 25, 50 years. Why do you think now is the time that this sort of broke out?
Well, I have a very pessimistic reason that I will give you.
I'd love to hear it.
I think women feel we have nothing left to lose in this Trump era.
Yeah.
And
I agree with you, by the way.
Do you?
I think Trump caused the Me Too movement in a good way. Meaning,
no, in a bad way, but in a good way.
Right. So the fact that he was elected made people say, look, I'm either going to speak now or that's it.
Right. Yeah.
And so I will say, maybe the ends don't justify the means. I don't know, but or maybe the ends justify the means. I don't know, but that was the end. Was that this Me Too movement came out because of this? Because all these women are talking about events that happened 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago with Harvey Weinstein. Why, and then there's the question, why didn't they talk about it earlier? They didn't have somehow permission from society to talk about it earlier.
Right.
And now it's not like they have permission now. It's that they had to they had to give themselves permission.
Yes. And I do feel like women who are privileged enough to be honest. I mean, think about it. We call women who speak out about horrible things that happen to them, we call them brave. What does that tell you about our society? That's because we acknowledge how much power those men have. And so only a woman who is incredibly brave will stand up to that.
And now, in some respects, these men right at the top had more power than ever before, and yet women were able to speak out against them.
I don't quite buy we're able to. I mean, we still don't know what the result. Look at the Cosby. He's still walking around in his mansion calling those women liars.
Yeah.
So we haven't seen, we're still in the middle of this story.
Right. And it's not only in Hollywood. I mean, we've seen it in Silicon Valley. We're starting to see it in Wall Street and
it's
in other
everywhere.
industries. It's just Hollywood's the most, the eyes of all the newspapers on Hollywood. But even before Hollywood, in Silicon Valley, it was kind of happening all in every venture capital firm and so on.
Right. The Uber story is what I think Susan Fowler's story was the starting point for the Me Too movement.
Right. So the Uber story, but there was also before that Kleiner Perkins, which is the big VC firm there. So there was a couple of stories. But that also leads to an interesting thing, which is I didn't know this until I read your book. You were the writer or co-writer on Lean In with Sheryl Sandberg, which seems like a total departure from writing on Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Maybe you could describe how you describe it in the book, and it's excellent, and Lean In is excellent, but maybe you could what happened?
So in 2009, David Letterman goes on air and admits that he's been having sex with women he works with. This was a surprise to no one who worked on the show. The big surprise was that he went on air and admitted it.
That was such a weird show, by the way, because I watched that show while in real time.
Yeah.
And the audience is like laughing because they didn't know if he was telling a joke or not. And he was just being straight out serious. He had to kind of come out with this, but he didn't even understand, I don't think, why they were laughing.
Right. And it was a weird story. He was being blackmailed because he had this long-term affair with an assistant who had a live-in boyfriend, and the live-in boyfriend had written a screenplay. I mean, the story's nuts. And I am sympathetic to him for that. But everyone seemed to have an opinion about this, including Barbara Walters, who goes on The View the next day and defends Dave, saying he's a very attractive man. Where else is he going to meet women except at work?
Or with his, okay, I won't say anything.
Right. So now it's really problematic when it's the boss. Office romances happen, but when it's the person who has the power to hire and fire you, it's not okay. And in fact, it was against Worldwide Pants harassment policy, too. So
Worldwide Pants being his production company.
Right. So everyone has an opinion. And at the same time, I learned through Nancy Franklin at The New Yorker that there were 0 women on the writing staff. And that actually did shock me because, I figured, after me and some others, there at least would always be one woman on staff, like you would want to cover your ass that way. And so when it went back to 0, I was shocked, and I explain it in my book as that it's not in Hollywood, it's not actually a glass ceiling you break through. It's the ceiling is made of that Terminator metal that you crack, but then it reforms and reconstitutes, and it's even stronger. So I feel compelled to write an article about my experience at the show and the sexual favoritism that I witnessed. And then I make this pivot to talk about gender discrimination in these writers' rooms. So I speak out about this in 2009. In 2010, Sheryl Sandberg does this amazing TED Talk called Why We Have So Few Women Leaders. And we have a mutual friend who I had reconnected with on Facebook, who in 2011 writes me, "Have you seen Sheryl Sandberg's TED Talk?" And I write back, "Seen it, I memorized it." So he connected us. She's working on some speeches. She wants some help smoothing them out. And we start this collaboration, which is one of the just best work experiences. No, it is the best work experience of my life.
The writing Lean In.
Working with Sheryl on speeches, working on Lean In. And, it's a mission.
Why was it the best?
Because it was a mission.
What did you learn from her while working with her?
Well, she is one of the world great communicators, and she's a wonderful leader. She's the hardest working person I know. She's the most generous boss I know, and that's not just compensation. I mean, with praise, with credit. She invites dissent, and I've rarely worked with leaders who do that, where she'll say, what am I missing? What am I getting wrong? And it's so empowering, which is a word I hate, but I'm using it in this case because it fits.
What do you think, like, how would you describe, since you and her are the experts, how would you describe the words lean in? Like, what does it mean?
So someone recently said to me, what did we say before we said lean in? We didn't say anything because we being women, didn't have permission to be ambitious. We were embarrassed to be ambitious. So to me, lean in really means going after what you want, which women just weren't comfortable saying they were doing before Cheryl invented lean in.
So for instance, I mean, I feel like you leaned in all through your career. Do you feel there were instances where you didn't?
Oh, there were. But one of the reasons I did want to write the book is because it is such a case study for lean in, including, so when Cheryl gives this TED Talk, she makes 3 points. She says, sit at the table, which I love because it's both metaphorical and figurative. Literally, I did not sit at the table when I was working at Newhart. I would sit on the periphery in this chair, even when they were reading a script I wrote. And all the other writers were at the table, but I didn't feel comfortable enough.
Really? You couldn't say,
to join them.
That's my script. I should be sitting here.
Not until someone gave me permission and waved me over. The second point she makes is don't leave before you leave, which means so many women are thinking ahead to the day they might have children that they back off from their careers early on because they think they will have to. And the third point she makes is make your partner a real partner. And this is something that I totally nailed. And I married a wonderful man who's
sitting here right now.
Who's sitting here, Colin Summers. And I would say this even if he weren't sitting here right now. And he was an architect and rode motorcycles. And yet the sexiest thing he ever said to me was, if we have a baby, I'd be happy to be the primary parent. And I just thought that was amazing because I love my career. I didn't want to give it up. But at the same time, I wanted a kid. And the solution was he stayed home.
So let me ask you, and you say in the book, actually, that lean in for men could be leaning more into your role in the family as a nurturer in the family and so on. And kind of the counter argument to that has been some role reversal will goes against hundreds of thousands or millions of years of kind of evolutionary psychology. Do you believe that at all? Or like you just said, the sexiest thing he said was this role reversal thing. So obviously it didn't turn off your attraction to him taking on a more feminine role.
Right. I don't believe it at all. I think that's a cultural construction. I mean, and I can tell you from our experience that he is the more nurturing of the two of us, and our kids are magnificent. And we both had to be comfortable with that cultural shift. So he had to be comfortable staying home, and I also had to be comfortable, being the breadwinner.
Right, because you would face criticism,
right,
of not being home with the
sure
kids. And to some extent,
and I never talked about my kids at work because I was so worried I'd be judged.
Right. So let me ask you this. This is sort of an odd question, but you wrote jokes for Barack Obama. He obviously was a hit with with your writing. If you had to write a joke for Donald Trump, would you, let's say you saying no was not an option, let's say for whatever reason you wanted to do it, what would you write? How would you think about it?
Well, I think he does have a sense of humor. I think it's very mean. So it would probably, I'd start with thinking, about who he could call ugly, or, because that's where his comedy lies. Although I did write a joke recently about, I don't know if he could tell it, but it was Mike Pence won't be alone with a woman unless his spouse is there, and Melania won't be alone with her spouse unless a photographer's there. So maybe he could tell that.
So that's a vulnerability that he doesn't necessarily show.
Yeah.
I don't know if he ever shows vulnerability. Maybe he does. I don't know.
He did a joke recently at the Alfalfa Club where he's like, people tell me that to be good at comedy, you have to be self-deprecating. Well, I'm the best at being self-deprecating.
All right.
And it's like, okay.
But I feel like that's been done, that joke.
Yeah, I do too.
So,
but that was the best of his jokes.
And what's next for you now? You've written this book. Are you working on 1,000 new TV show ideas or anything?
Always. I'd actually like to direct again. I have a chapter about directing. I've directed 2 movies. And that's the big challenge. I'm kind of a challenge junkie. So.
And you like what do you think? I guess last question to close this off. First off, I do want to say just the funny parts and a few hard truths about sneaking into the Hollywood Boys Club. This book was so great. I've lent it out to several friends who are, interested in the television industry, and I'll probably keep lending it out. Like, I just thought it was an excellent book, and I love reading these types of books. And where do you think television is heading now? Like, I feel there's something happening, which is you have Netflix and Amazon throwing $20 billion at creating original programming. A lot of that money is going to be wasted. And so there's eventually going to be some backlash to that. And meanwhile, YouTube, like there are thousands and thousands of YouTube channels where every single video those channels do get more views or watches than the average cable TV show. So what do you think happens in TV in general?
I think it becomes personality driven, and it's the means of production have no barrier to entry anymore. People shoot movies on their phones, and I think that's exciting. I think it means the gatekeepers don't have as much power and the creators get more.
Yeah, I think you're right. I hope you're right. And
the question is whether we'll be able to find that material, right? Because even as it is, I feel like I can't consume, all the good stuff that I want to.
But that's okay, because enough people are finding things that they enjoy that's why these YouTube channels are getting so many more views than, let's say, the average TV show. Like the average Netflix TV show, nobody will ever hear of. Like, right. I don't even know if the average Netflix show gets any views. We only know about the 3 that we love and that everyone loves. And same thing for Amazon, and Hulu has original shows, and I think iTunes has original shows. So they all get buried in the muck, whereas YouTube, the best stuff kind of finds its niche audience somehow. So it seems like and like you say, it seems like the middlemen are not involved in the YouTube ones, whereas with TV you have, managers, agents,
right.
The first production studio, the second production studio, the final outlet, and so on.
Exactly.
And each one can say no to you.
Well, and we also have access to all the old stuff now, and so there's just a lot of content.
Does that make you scared at all?
No. But I actually think, there's new technologies to come, and it's the technology that drives the content. I mean, the example I always use is Gutenberg got top billing over the Bible.
Top
billing over the Bible. It's Gutenberg's Bible, right? And so we'll see whether it's VR or... I remember years ago going to a meeting at Warner Brothers about HD TV because everyone was going to be watching on these huge screens, and we were told, like, your makeup artists need to rethink how they're doing makeup on the actors because we can see every pore. And instead, everyone is watching on their phones.
Right, which is lower quality,
tiny. So who knows where it's going?
I wanna just close this reading one section. It's from the beginning of your career, and you got 3 pieces of advice, and you mentioned this friend of yours who gave you advice, but you mentioned the first line. 1, never be afraid to write on spec, which I think applies to every industry. Don't be afraid to kind of deliver free in order to get people to notice you.
Right.
And also it gives good practice. It gets you familiar with things. Number 2, don't ask friends for work, which is a little interesting. Like, what was the basis of that advice?
I took it very personally. I think they were just saying, don't ask us for work.
But it's probably good advice.
No, it is. No, I do remember
there's
what he said.
research that backs that, actually.
Really? No, what they said, look, if you're friends, then your friends will know you're looking for work, and if they want to hire you, they will.
You know what the research says is that your friends of friends are the places where you're most likely to find work.
Oh.
So on LinkedIn, it's not your first level connections, it's your second level connections that usually provide you with opportunities. And so your third piece of advice was take any job that comes your way. You never know where it might lead. And I guess that's true if you have like a certain passion, like you knew you wanted to break into the entertainment industry, so just take anything.
Sure.
So
or even like, late in my career, I was offered a job on NCIS. And I just thought, well, that's fun. I never thought I'd be working on this kind of a procedural show. And I loved it.
What was a joke on the bloodiest crime scene possible?
They didn't do jokes, but I did co-write an episode where we had a DARPA car and the car was murdering people. So I did get to do a killer car.
All right, a killer car. That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, Nell Scovell, just the funny parts. I can't recommend this book highly enough. I'm really glad you wrote it.
Oh,
and
thank you.
As long as you're at it, buy Lean In as well. Everyone
Yes.
should be reading that book anyway. And thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, this was fun.
Thank you.
AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry and literally billions of dollars are being invested. So buckle up. The problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power, so how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/advance. That's oracle.com/advance. oracle.com/advance.